and welcome to the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashan Silva. On this week's episode, Billy Harper, his life and times and best hits. Billy Harper is one of the most innovative jazz artists of his time. His style is diverse and varied, from bop to free jazz. He started out at age 5 singing in choirs. By age 14, he'd formed his first band, the Billy Harper Quintet. He went on to graduate in music and began winning numerous awards for his performances. In 1966, he moved to New York City and began performing and touring alongside some of the jazz legends at the time like Gil Evans, Max Roach, Thad Jones, Art Blakey, and more. His debut album was a hit right off the bat when it was released in 1973. It was called Capra Black. Another one of his most popular albums, Black Saint, released in 1976. Other notable albums include Soul of an Angel, Knowledge of Self, Love on the Sudan, and more. Harper said of his albums that they had a greater purpose, to heal and to be uplifting. Harper's awards include 2 awards from the National Endowment of the Arts and an International Critics Award for tenor saxophone playing. So that was a quick insight into the biography of Billy Harper, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashan Silva. Coming up on today's show, an in-depth coverage of Billy Harper, his life and times and best albums. Also coming up, some trending album and festival news. Stay tuned to the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashan Silva to find out more. We'll be right back after some music. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashan Silva. On this week's episode, Billy Harper, his life and times and best albums, and on this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. So today on the Jazz Update, it's about Billy Harper. He's one of the many tenor saxophonists that was inspired by John Coltrane. Harper is a very convincing jazz artist, able to play any style from bop to free jazz. Some of his defining traits as a saxophonist include his energy, versatility, and innovation. He's also a fan of blues and gospel styles. Harper grew up in Houston. By the age of 5, he was singing in his church choir. When he was 11, he was gifted a saxophone for Christmas. That sparked off his love for saxophone playing. He would take lessons, although he was mostly self-taught, from his uncles who were also musicians. So Harper started out playing in local bands, and by his early teens, he'd formed his own band, the Billy Harper Quartet. He went on to graduate in music from the North Texas State University. In 1966, he moved to New York. That year, he got his first big break, performing in a band that was featured in an NBC TV series called The Big Apple. That TV appearance gave him a lot of exposure, and he was soon being invited to collaborate alongside other jazz legends of his time like Art Blakey, Max Roach, and more. Billy Harper went on to perform alongside some of the greatest drummers in jazz. 1968 to 70, he performed alongside the Art Blakey Jazz Messengers, with Elvin Jones in 1970, and in the late 70s, he was a member of Max Roach's band. In the 70s, he began recording and releasing his own albums. His album releases were synonymous with the debuts of 2 music labels. In 1975, he released Black Saint, a debut recording on the Black Saint label. Then again in 1979, his album Live in Europe launched the Soul Note label. His albums typically were jazz influenced with spiritual themes. He said of his albums, he wanted his music to be more than just music. They were created to heal and to uplift. In the 80s and 90s, he performed less, although he remained an active performer, mostly as a band leader. He's received numerous awards for his music, most notably from the National Endowment of the Arts. So that was some insight into the biography of Billy Harper, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashan Silva. Now for some album news. So Billie Davis is a drummer and composer. She's well known for her avant-garde jazz compositions and innovative drumming styles. She's out with a new album release. It's called On Hollywood Boulevard, live at the Mint in New Orleans, and it's going up for grabs on August 8th. So this album is based on Billy's experiences while living in Hollywood Boulevard. It's about Hollywood Boulevard, the lifestyle, and what Hollywood represents to the world. How the world of Hollywood has influenced TV, social media, and music. The music in this album is very electric and dynamic. Consists of 5 songs, including 1 instrumental and an improvised song. Some of the songs from the setlist: The Girl in the Window, Yellow Sunshine, Palm Trees, and more. Evan Obala's on keyboard and trombone, Oliver Watkinson's on electric bass. So that was some album news, and you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashan Silva. We're going for a short break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Billy Harper's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashan Silva. On this week's show, Billy Harper, his life and times and best music. On this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what we're going to be talking about on this hour. The first album is called Capra Black, released in 1973. This album was recorded in the early 70s. The bandmates on this album production were stylistically diverse. The setlist in this album was typical of Harper's style, jazz influenced with spiritual themes. Also, this album was his debut release, and it garnered him a lot of attention from the jazz world. Black Saint was released in 1975. It was his first album release on the Black Saint label. And for many of his fans, Black Saint is synonymous with Billy Harper's legacy. This album is like a cross-section of everything Billy Harper, gives us an insight into his style, and it's one of the best spiritual or modal jazz albums of his compilation. There's also some of Harper's own compositions here. Another beautiful album from Harper's compilation, Antibes 75, released from a 1975 live recording. This album was taken from a live performance by Harper and his quintet at the Antibes Jazz Festival in 1975. A beautiful performance, and the backdrop of the festival was also breathtaking. So that was a quick recap of everything that we're going to be discussing on this hour, and you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We'll be right back after some music. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. On this week's episode, Billy Harper, his life and times and best albums, and on this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best hits of all time. The first album is called Capra Black, released in 1973. This album was recorded in the early 70s when Harper was already a mature artist. And like many of his albums, this one embodied a mix-up of spiritual and musical influences. And Billy Harper was this influenced from a young age. He was from a family of musicians and the son of a preacher. And at age 3, he was singing in church choirs where his father preached. In 1960, he teamed up with jazz greats like Art Blakey and the Mel Lewis Big Band. He would tour and perform with them. So that was part of his initial experience in the jazz arena, and it contributed to this. The bandmates on this album production were stylistically diverse. There's Elvin Jones on drums, Billy Coban was fresh out of the Horace Silver quartet at the time of this album, pianist George Cables and trombonist Julian Priester, who played alongside Lonnie Smith's band. The setlist in the album was typical of Harper's style, jazz influenced with spiritual themes. Sir Galahad is one of the standout tracks from this album. There's a beautiful medley of songs like Soulfully, I Love You, and Black Spiritual of Love. And the album is rounded off with Cry of Hunger, a very passionate song. So this album was his debut release, and it garnered him a lot of attention from the jazz world. Black Saint was the next album released in 1975. So there's a lot of history behind this album. For one thing, the label Black Saint Records, on which the album was published, is named after the label. Also, it's one of the first records released on this label that became renowned for American creative and free jazz releases in the 70s. And for many of his fans, Black Saint is synonymous with Billy Harper's legacy. It's even better than his hit album Capra Black when he debuted. This album is like a cross-section of everything Billy Harper, gives us an insight into his style, and is one of the best spiritual or modal jazz albums of his compilation. Back in the day, Black Saint label was relatively unknown. This album release was instrumental in bringing it to the forefront. And the reason is simple, the music is excellent. For example, the track Croquet Ballet. In many ways a typical 70s jazz track, the epic drumming of Malcolm Pinson leads the way. He leads the band to greater heights with his playing on this track. Another great melody, Wild and Peaceful Heart. It starts off peacefully and builds into a passionate rhythm. The band keep up the pace with Harper providing the saxophone melodies. A very energetic track, and Bonner's piano are highlights here. There's also some of Harper's own compositions here, for instance the track Dance Eternal Spirits Dance. Joe Bonner's piano playing is epic on this album. He sounds like a cross between Herbie Hancock and McCoy Tyner on this album. There's a newcomer, David Friesen, on bass. Harper and Virgil Jones add some spice with saxophone and trumpet melodies. Overall, it's a fantastic album. Another beautiful album from Harper's compilation, Antibes 75, released from a 1975 recording. This album was taken from a live performance by Harper and his quintet at the Antibes Jazz Festival in 1975. And it came just days after Harper's monumental album release Black Saint, which incidentally was the debut album release on the Black Saint label. And as good as Black Saint was, this album showcased Harper's quintet at an even greater level. It was a beautiful performance, and the backdrop of the festival was also breathtaking. Surrounded by natural beauty, pine trees and stars, Harper's quintet delivered track after track with their characteristic brilliance. Some of the highlights of the album include the band's soulful deliveries on signature tunes like Cry of Hunger and Croquet Ballet. So that was a bit of insight into some of Billy Harper's best albums of all time, and you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. Now for some more album news. Chicago composer and bassist Andrew Vogt is out with a new album called Awakening. So Andrew started out playing in jazz bands in Chicago in 2010. He's performed on over 60 albums spanning a wide range of jazz genres. Awakening is his first full-length album from the avant-garde jazz genre, a compilation of acoustic bass music. This album features a Chicago band who share his passions for avant-garde jazz. The setlist is a mix-up of original compositions and covers of classics. The music is passionate and intense and features ballads like Dusk and complex rhythms like Dark Blues. There's also a beautiful cover of a Beatles classic, Eleanor Rigby. So overall, Awakening is a blend of tradition and innovation. For more information, please visit votemusic.com. That's VOGTmusic.com. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Billy Harper's best albums of all time. Stay tuned.